Well, the BBC has apologised to Donald Trump for an episode of Panorama which spliced parts of one of his speeches together, but they have rejected his demand for compensation.
Now, the corporation says it was an error of judgment and it won't show the programme again. The US president's lawyers have threatened to sue the BBC for $1 billion in damages.
And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse for the beleaguered BBC, there has been yet another alleged bit of doctoring.
Yes, it's emerged that Newsnight appeared to air spliced footage of Donald Trump's January the 6th speech back in 2022, which was 2 years before the Panorama documentary broadcast. So how will the US president respond? Well, we're joined now in the studio by the former BBC journalist and co-director of Compassion in Politics, Jennifer Nadel. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming in this morning. Now, I imagine for everybody who works for or used to work for the BBC, it's been quite a tough week reading all these headlines and this dossier. How accurate do you think these allegations of bias are?
I don't think the allegations of bias are justified at all, but undoubtedly, a terrible mistake was made. I mean, that's terrible journalism to splice together two bits without revealing that there's an edit from different parts of a speech which changed the sense of what's said. So that's bad journalism, and there has been an apology for that. But what has happened is that that mistake has been weaponised and used to attack the BBC, which is a really important institution, not just here in Britain, but across the world. It's the most trusted news provider. And every news organisation is going to make mistakes. I mean, I'm sure they're made here. No journalist wants to make mistakes. And if they are made, they need to be owned and there needs to be a quick apology. But for that then to be used to mount a campaign against the only publicly funded news provider that is a point of unity, it came just after Traitors, which everyone in the country was watching and talking about. And at this moment, when Britain's more divided than ever, we need these unifying institutions, and the BBC is one of them.
And Jennifer, I'll just point out some of it, because on the point of bias, now listen, no media station is perfect. We all make mistakes, and we can accept those mistakes if the apology is good. I think the first thing I'll say is it took the BBC 6 months and a threat of a lawsuit by the President of the United States for them to apologise, despite them allegedly knowing what was going on. So there seems to be an issue there, at least. But then some of the other apologies that have emerged out of this dossier, Gaza, Trump and BBC Verify, which has released a report about, some car insurance saying it was racist. They're quite left-leaning, the things that they're criticising and getting wrong. So that's where I believe that people are feeling this feeling of bias. It's that it's not just that they're getting it wrong on everything, it's that actually when they are getting it wrong, it seems to be because there's some sort of concoction of left-wing bias in that journalism.
Well, I think that's a very popular narrative in the right-wing press, but there are many on the left who accuse BBC of right-wing bias, and in fact the BBC's chairman, who's just resigned, was in fact a Conservative candidate. A member of the board was an advisor to a Conservative Prime Minister. So whilst those accusations are going to be thrown about from either side, the reality is that it's a board which had two senior Conservative figures on it. So I'm not sure I don't think that that's justified. And I think that either side is going to attack. And
Jennifer, I think if it had only been the Trump edits, bad journalism as they are, then I think you'd be right that it would be you couldn't faithfully use those arguments to say the whole of the BBC is biased or struggles to be impartial. But if you read the entire dossier, there is a pattern that emerges, whether it's to do with the trans debate, Israel, even the curation, actually, of the stories.
Let's talk about this dossier, because what it actually is a partisan list of complaints by someone who has
Well, he was somebody who was appointed as an independent advisor.
They were, and they're now a lobbyist, and their dossier reads like an agenda, the same script that is spoken by anyone on the right who's critical of the BBC. And let's just think about the motivation for undermining the BBC. Absolutely, it should be criticised, and if bias is found, that should be rooted out. There is no disagreement about that. But something more is happening here. It's a deliberate attempt to undermine the the BBC.
But Jennifer, I have to take issue with that.
Reliable facts.
You say that the dossier is some sort of an attack, but where's the right-wing dossier bias? I don't see it. And I'm sure that people on the left would find it if it was there. And unfortunately, there
are plenty of complaints. They just haven't been leaked to the Telegraph, a newspaper with an agenda of attacking the BBC.
But there's plenty of newspapers with agendas. You've got all the left-leaning newspapers. Let's get real. All media has an agenda to it, but we can't. All I'm asking for is to point to the evidence of there being a right-wing, collusion to take down the BBC. We all want the BBC to be a great institution because it can do wonders for Britain, particularly about purporting our culture across the world. But it does have a problem with reporting domestic issues to British people, and that is where I take issue with it. I have no problem with the BBC reporting things fairly and accurately. I would love to see more of that, but I do see that there is a pattern, and I don't see this right-wing dossier anywhere.
Well, I'm sure that there is one, yeah. Plenty of individual complaints, but what you're not seeing, you're seeing a concerted, organised onslaught on the BBC with that dossier, as you're calling it, or that letter of critiques from someone who had advised the board and who is also very close to the former Conservative advisor who is on the board. And it's the Telegraph that's leading this onslaught. When I was invited to come onto this programme, we didn't even know what the Telegraph was going to print, but I was asked to come in because news organisations like yours have an agenda similar to that of the Telegraph, which is to shift things to the
Jennifer,
right.
But what if that agenda is actually just truth? So let's take the trans debate. The BBC have repeatedly reported that men are women, and they've used female pronouns and female names for biological men. And we know from science and history and fact that you can't change your sex. Now, that is a deliberate attempt to confuse people, even if not to mislead people. Whereas most people in this country know that men and women are different. You are born either male or female. That is a fact. And if the BBC are not reporting facts, but thought experiments, then how can they say they're impartial? They're the ones with the agenda.
Hang on a sec. We now have a legal ruling which has determined this issue.
We don't need a legal ruling. We've got 100,000 years of human history to prove that men and women are different.
Well, I'm not here to talk about trans issues. What I am here to say is that that's a complex issue that has now been resolved, and the BBC's reporting of it has changed. I don't want to get into that issue. What I want to talk about is the fact that the BBC is doing its best. Mistakes will be made, and when those mistakes are made, we need an apology, and it should have happened more quickly, and it has not been well managed at all, and that has very bad consequences. But what is worse is when those mistakes are then taken and used to attack the whole institution, because that is not justified.
Well, Jennifer, the final thing I would say, and I think, GB News wears its heart on its sleeve. I think when people tune into GB News, they know what to expect. When you tune into the BBC, you are almost forced to pay a licence fee, a tax for the BBC to exist. We are at the will of the viewers. If the people switch off and don't watch GB News anymore, we won't exist. The BBC will exist if no one watches it. And that is the problem. It is not a free market institution. It doesn't have the strings and the levers. So if I wanted to boycott the BBC...
Hang on a sec.
I'd love for you to respond, but my point is that the BBC has no levers of the free market to change if people don't want it to. When I look at the roster of presenters that have now gone on to form their own podcast and previously and all these other things, they're very left-leaning. They're very, very left-leaning.
Well, I think that's very rich coming from a station which has a roster
We're not paid by the taxpayer.
No, but what you have to do is you have to make your money by driving clicks. And the way you drive clicks is by propagating hate. It's by having sensationalist attitudes that drive...
Jennifer?
The BBC
Give me an example
is
of
not
propagating
in the
hate
business.
at GB News.
Well, the first item you both spoke about was about one migrant who wants to go home, as if that shows the whole immigration system.
No, but I think it shows the ridiculousness of it, doesn't it?
What it does is it amplifies hate, it drives hate, it creates an element of fear, and that's why we have headlines that are dominated by immigration. The real issue in this country is the cost of living crisis. So let's talk about the real issues.
Well, actually, the number one issue on most polls now for people is immigration. I think mass immigration over the last few years has been... So it's not to do with the fact that 1.5 million people have come over in the past few years. That's got nothing to do with the fact that immigration is now a primary concern for most people.
I think that obviously is an issue of concern, but what has happened is that newspapers and organisations like yours have created an environment where they're seen as a threat, where racism becomes legitimised, and 50% of the stories about Muslims that are covered in the whole of the UK press are covered by you. You have an anti-Islam bias.
Thank goodness that somebody's speaking about these things.
But Jennifer, can I just say, no, we don't. It's an absolute nonsense. Can I just say, had the BBC done its job, Jennifer, if you don't, had the BBC done its job and reported the stories that it should be reporting up and down this country, GB News wouldn't exist. It's the fact that the BBC has willingly brushed away the Pakistani rape gangs. It has brushed away one of the biggest issues in facing our country, thanks to Charlie Peters here, who's exposed this massive thing that's been hiding under the rug. BBC didn't want to touch it with a barge pole, and that's the reason why we exist. We exist here because we are filling a vacuum of information the BBC has deliberately hidden.
For noxious, very right-wing views and anti-immigration stances.
But
that
the BBC, I mean, you rolled
funded by a private hedge funder. We don't even know who really owns you. Exactly. All of us own the BBC, and when there's a problem, it comes out in the open. The complaint is made. Sometimes it is handled badly, and then heads roll.
6 months later, thanks to the Telegraph doing some journalism that BBC Verify, which we pay for, could have done itself.
I think it's a really good illustration of how it's impossible to be impartial if we can't even agree on the facts. And if we can't agree what the facts are on immigration, if we can't even agree that there is a fact that males and females are different.
You're conflating opinion with fact.
Can we agree on it? If we can't agree on any facts, then there is no impartiality, is there? It's not possible.
But we are agreeing on facts. We're agreeing that that broadcast went out, that the splicing shouldn't have happened, that was misleading, that an apology was made late.
Let's end on those facts, point of agreement.
But we're not agreeing on the opinion that propagates and amplifies hate and fear.
It's an opinion. Okay. We air all views on GB News, the home of
We certainly do. OK, thank you very much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you coming on, having a hearty debate with us. Thank you. BBC spokesman says Chairman Samir Shah sent a personal letter to the White House to apologise for editing of the speech in the Panorama programme, but added this.
While the BBC sincerely regrets the manner in which the video clip was edited, we strongly disagree there is a basis for defamation claim. Trump had said that the corporation defrauded the public.
Okie dokie.